In the hermetic laboratories of medieval Europe, where smoke-blackened alembics stood sentinel in candlelit chambers, the alchemists inscribed upon their vessels a peculiar symbol, a serpent consuming its own tail, encircling a sealed flask. This Ouroboros marked the vas hermeticum, the hermetically sealed vessel, proclaiming a truth that would echo through centuries. That which must be transformed cannot escape, and that which seeks transformation must first consent to containment. Yet beneath this image of material apparatus lay encoded a doctrine far more unsettling, that the human soul itself must become such a vessel, sealed against all exit, while within its confines unfold deaths so complete that identity itself dissolves into prima materia, the undifferentiated chaos from which new being emerges. The hermetic seal represented for these adepts not merely a technical necessity for their chemical operations, but a psychological and spiritual principle of profound import. When Jung encountered these texts in his explorations of the collective unconscious, he recognized within their cryptic symbolism a map of individuation, the process by which the psyche confronts, integrates, and transcends its own contradictions to birth something the alchemists called the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, and which Jung understood as the realized self. This self, they insisted, could only emerge through a sequence of deaths, each more complete than the last, each stripping away another layer of false identity until nothing remained but the irreducible essence of being itself. The doctrine central to Hermetic philosophy holds that authentic transformation cannot occur through addition, but only through subtraction, not through acquisition, but through surrender, not through expansion, but through concentration. The sealed vessel prevents dilution, prevents escape, prevents the admixture of foreign elements that would corrupt the work. Applied to the soul, this principle demands a willingness to remain within the crucible of one's own experience without recourse to the countless mechanisms of evasion that consciousness employs to avoid genuine encounter with itself. The alchemists spoke of three great deaths, three distinct dissolutions of being, through which the soul must pass to achieve what they called the great work, the magnum opus, the transformation of base matter into gold, of unconscious life into conscious existence, of fragmented ego into integrated self. These were not metaphorical deaths, comfortable abstractions that might be contemplated from safe distance. The texts describe with disturbing precision the phenomenology of psychological annihilation, the experience of watching everything you believe yourself to be undergo putrefaction in the sealed darkness of self-examination. Jung recognized in these descriptions the same terror and transformation he witnessed in his patients, who committed genuinely to the individuation process and which he himself endured during his own descent into the unconscious following his break with Freud. The hermetic seal, then, becomes the commitment to remain present to one's own dissolution, to not flee from the laboratory when the work grows dark and the vessel fills with shadows. The first death the alchemists termed the nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction of all that is. In their material operations, this stage manifested as the reduction of substances to black, formless residue through prolonged heating. But the psychological operation corresponding to this phase involves something far more harrowing, the confrontation with and collapse of the persona, that carefully constructed mask of identity through which the ego presents itself to world. We spend our lives assembling this persona, brick by careful brick, defining ourselves through roles, achievements, relationships, beliefs, and the myriad identifications that give us shape in our own eyes and in the eyes of others. Parent, professional, believer, skeptic, success, failure, these labels and countless others form the architecture of self-concept, the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The first death demands the dissolution of this architecture. It begins often through crisis, the failure of a cherished identity, the collapse of a defining relationship, the loss of status or capacity upon which selfhood seem to depend. But for those who undertake the work consciously, it can commence through simple, sustained observation of the mechanisms by which identity maintains itself. Watch closely enough, with sufficient honesty, and the persona begins to reveal its constructed nature, its essential emptiness. You are not your job, though losing it may feel like annihilation. You are not your relationships, though their ending may seem to erase you. You are not your beliefs, though abandoning them may appear to cast you into void. Each identification examined under the pitiless light of awareness shows itself to be a garment worn, not the wearer itself. This recognition precipitates the blackening. The things that gave life meaning begin to lose their luster. The ambitions that once drove action reveal their ultimate insignificance. The roles that provided definition now appear as ill-fitting costumes. Everything that seemed solid undergoes putrefaction, rotting in the sealed vessel of honest self-examination. The temptation to flee this process is overwhelming. The psyche offers countless escape routes, new identifications to replace the failing ones, spiritual bypasses that promise transcendence without dissolution, distractions that defer the confrontation. But the hermetic seal prevents exit. To achieve transformation, one must remain in the darkness as everything known decays. Jung observed that patients frequently arrived at this threshold and retreated, constructing new personas to replace the failing ones, preferring the comfort of false identity to the terror of no identity at all. The culture conspires in this retreat, offering endless templates for selfhood, ready-made identities that can be adopted wholesale. But the one who seals the vessel, who commits to remaining present as the persona dies, discovers something unexpected in the depths of the Nigredo. Beneath the constructed self lies not void, but something far older, far stranger, the unconscious itself, teeming with contents that have never been integrated, with rejected aspects of being, with shadows and potential selves that have lived unlived in the depths. The alchemical texts describe the blackened matter in the vessel as containing within it, hidden, the seeds of gold. So too does the dissolved persona reveal, in its very dissolution, materials for genuine selfhood. But these materials cannot be accessed while consciousness remains identified with its surface constructions. The first death strips away the false to reveal the raw material of the true. Yet this material itself appears chaotic, fragmented, contradictory, the warring impulses and rejected qualities that persona consciousness could not accommodate, which leads inevitably to the second death. The alchemists called this second phase the mortificatio, the death of death itself, the dissolution not merely of false identity, but of the very principle of identification. Where the first death dissolved what we think we are, the second death dissolves the thinker itself, the observing ego that believes itself separate from and superior to the contents of consciousness it observes. This represents a far more subtle and complete annihilation. The ego, having survived the collapse of persona by positioning itself as witness to that collapse, now discovers that it too must die. In their operations, the alchemists describe this phase as involving separation and purification, the careful distinction of elements previously confused, followed by the death of the operator's attachment to outcome. The psychological correspondence involves the realization that the ego itself, that sense of being a distinct, autonomous agent navigating experience, constitutes another layer of construction, another story consciousness tells itself. Meditation traditions have long recognized this truth, but the alchemists approached it through a different path, through the sustained observation of psychological process within the sealed vessel of focused introspection. Watch the ego operate. Watch how it claims credit for actions that arise from depths it does not control. Watch how it distances itself from qualities it finds unacceptable, projecting them outward onto others. Watch how it constructs narrative continuity where there is only a sequence of discontinuous moments of awareness. Watch long enough, with sufficient detachment, and the ego reveals itself as a function, not an entity, a process by which the psyche maintains the illusion of unity and continuity. This recognition precipitates the second death. The experience of this dissolution differs markedly from the first. Where the death of persona brings grief, the death of ego brings disorientation so complete that language barely captures it. Who grieves when the griever itself dissolves? Who observes when the observer is revealed as another observed content? The alchemists spoke of the white darkness that follows the black, of a state beyond suffering, because the one who might suffer has temporarily ceased. Jung termed this the encounter with the self. Not yet integration with the self, but naked confrontation with the totality of the psyche when ego no longer mediates that encounter. This proves for most the most isolating aspect of the great work. The first death can be shared, witnessed, supported by others who have undergone similar persona collapse. But the second death occurs in a solitude beyond loneliness, for loneliness requires a lonely one, and that very one has dissolved. The sealed vessel permits no companion here, yet the texts insist this death too is necessary, for as long as ego maintains its fiction of separateness, true integration remains impossible. The opposites that must be united, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, order and chaos, can only meet when the ego that would keep them divided has died. But even this does not complete the work. The alchemists knew that the mere dissolution of ego, however complete, did not itself constitute transformation. Mystics might remain in this state, dissolved in undifferentiated consciousness, united with everything precisely because they are nothing. But the Hermetic tradition pursued a different end, not the death of self, but its rebirth in integrated form, not escape from individuality, but its perfection. This required a third death, subtler and stranger than the previous two. The philosophers termed this final phase the conjunctio, the sacred marriage, the union of opposites. But buried within this union lies a death rarely acknowledged, the death of the possibility of return. The first death is reversible. New personas can be constructed from the ruins of old ones. The second death is reversible. Ego can reconstitute itself after even complete dissolution. But the third death, the death that occurs in genuine integration, cannot be undone. When opposite principles truly unite within the psyche, when shadow and light, masculine and feminine, order and chaos merge not through dominance or suppression, but through recognition of their essential identity, something irreversible occurs. The one who achieves this integration cannot unknow what has been known, cannot unsee what has been seen, cannot return to the innocent dividedness that preceded the work. This third death, then, is the death of innocence itself, the death of the possibility of unconsciousness. The integrated individual, the one in whom the work has completed, bears a burden unknown to those who live in comfortable identification with ego and persona. They must live consciously, aware of the multiplicities within themselves, unable to retreat into the simple narratives that organize most lives. Every choice becomes fraught with complexity, for they recognize within themselves the voice arguing for every option. Every action carries the weight of its shadow, for they cannot deny the darkness that accompanies every light. The alchemical texts describe the philosopher's stone, the final product of the great work, in paradoxical terms. It is the hardest substance, yet malleable, most precious, yet worthless to those who do not know its value, red, yet containing all colors, immortal, yet born from death. Jung recognized in these paradoxes a description of the individuated self, that which emerges when the three deaths have been endured and integration achieved. This self is not the ego that died, nor the persona that rotted, nor even the self encountered in the second death's dissolution. It is something new, born from the union of opposites that only death made possible. Yet the texts offer warnings alongside promises. The work, once completed, does not grant peace, but rather demands continual engagement. The vessel must remain sealed, not just during the operation, but after, for the integration achieved can be lost through inattention, through the gradual drift back into identification with surface and the comfortable forgetting of depth. The three deaths must in some sense be died again and again, not as trauma repeated, but as recognition renewed. The ongoing acknowledgement that what you think you are is not what you are, that who thinks is not separate from what is thought, and that the integration achieved is not possession but participation. The immortal self that emerges from these deaths bears little resemblance to conventional notions of immortality. It does not survive bodily death, makes no claim to eternal existence, promises no escape from finitude. Rather, its immortality consists in having died to the things that die, having released identification with that which must pass, having encountered and integrated that which cannot pass because it never was. The persona dies with changing circumstances. Ego dies in genuine encounter with the self. Even the self as object must die to reveal the self as subject. What remains when these have died? The texts suggest something that cannot be named without falsifying it, something that has always been present but which only death reveals. This is not a comfortable teaching. The Hermetic tradition offers no consolation, no promise that the work will bring happiness or success or even relief from suffering. Indeed, the sealed vessel ensures that suffering cannot be escaped, only transformed through sustained attention. The three deaths strip away everything that might protect consciousness from direct encounter with its own ground. Persona shields us from judgment. Ego shields us from chaos. The fantasy of return shields us from the terror of irrevocable change. All shields must fall. What compels a soul to enter this vessel, to consent to these deaths, to remain sealed against all exit, while everything undergoes dissolution? Not hope, for hope belongs to ego's future orientation and dies in the second death. Not desire, for desire belongs to persona's acquisition projects and rots in the first death. Not even curiosity, though that may initiate the work. Those who complete the great work report something closer to necessity, a recognition that consciousness has reached a threshold beyond which it cannot proceed without transformation, a sense that remaining as one is constitutes a betrayal of potential more unbearable than the terror of change. The Hermetic seal, then, represents not imprisonment but commitment, the willingness to remain present to one's own process regardless of what that process demands. In our age of constant distraction, endless options, perpetual movement, this commitment becomes revolutionary. To seal the vessel means to stop fleeing, to stop accumulating experiences and identities and insights as armor against genuine encounter with what is. It means to stay with the work, even when, especially when, the work brings death. Jung spent decades exploring these themes with patients brave enough to undertake the descent. He witnessed repeatedly the pattern the alchemists encoded, the collapse of persona leading to encounter with shadow, the dissolution of ego leading to confrontation with self, the integration of opposites leading to something he could only term numinous, sacred, that which exceeds psychological categories even as it manifests through psychological process. His writings on alchemy constitute his most mature work, precisely because they synthesize his understanding of transformation's necessity with his respect for transformation's terror. The three philosophical deaths, then, are not stages to be gotten through, but recognitions to be lived. The death of persona, I am not what I think I am. The death of ego, there is no I separate from what is thought. The death of return, what has been integrated cannot be undissolved. Each recognition brings its own liberation and its own burden. Each requires the sealed vessel of sustained attention, the refusal to flee or forget or defer the confrontation. Each transforms not by replacing old with new, but by revealing what has always been present beneath the constructions consciousness builds to avoid seeing itself clearly. In the end, the Hermetic Seal marks not a prison, but a sanctuary, the one place where consciousness can encounter itself without the mediating interference of persona's performance or ego's defensiveness. Within that sealed space, deaths occur that would be impossible in the dispersed attention of ordinary life. And from those deaths, if the work is pursued with courage and honesty, something immortal emerges. Not because it transcends death, but because it has died so completely that death has nothing left to claim. The vessel stands sealed in every soul that dares to undertake the great work. The three deaths await within, patient as they have always been, ready to strip away everything false, everything defensive, everything that prevents consciousness from recognizing its own deepest nature. The work demands everything precisely because everything except that deepest nature must die for integration to occur. The gold you seek is not the eternal life of ego, not the preservation of persona, not the escape from death. The gold is the recognition that consciousness itself, having died to all it thought it was, discovers what it has always been. Not separate from, but participant in the great process of being itself, forever transforming, forever dying, forever being born anew from its own ashes. The Hermetic Seal ensures you cannot flee from this recognition once begun. The three deaths ensure that recognition comes not as intellectual understanding, but as lived transformation. And the immortal self that emerges stands not beyond death, but beyond the fear of death, having already died to everything that death could take.